problem. I'll just stop recording. It was. So we're now recording. Delighted to have Nigel Paine with us from Nigel Paine, Dr. Nigel Paine from nigelpaine.com, starting with a quote. And Nigel, here's the quote. And do you want to talk us through it and then we'll go to the poll?
Yes, I do. First of all, Don, I want to say I hope people appreciate just how much emphasis and time and trouble we took to get color coordinated shirts today.
Yeah.
We always manage to do it, Don. It's almost like we share the same part of our brain is
sometimes it simply happens, Nigel. What can I say?
It's a mirror neuron work, I think, somewhere. Anyway, this quote, I've just spent 2 days with about 40 CLOs from mostly all over Europe, and very interesting. Last moment of the 2 days, one of the people there, and I can't name them because I haven't cleared the quote, verbatim quote, like a penny dropping, we need an existential change in learning and development to be relevant for our organizations. And what she meant by that was that our very existence is threatened because there's so much change. We began to outline just how many jobs, roles, people, process, everything is going to shift over the next few years. Partly because of AI, but it wasn't just AI. Look at the global issues, economically, politically. It's all making huge pressure on organizations to adapt, to remake themselves. And the point being made was, we can't escape that. In L&D, we've got this fabulous opportunity to move center stage, or an amazing opportunity to make ourselves irrelevant. Yeah. And we don't have a choice. We're irrelevant, or we make an existential change. So that was basically the point being made, and I thought it was a
so do or die, change or become irrelevant. That's your message, Nigel. Do we want to see what people in the room think?
Yes, I would.
All right. So we have a poll. The poll is Nigel's quote. We need an existential change. I'm going to open the poll up and I'm going to broadcast the results. Do you agree that we need an existential change? I think it might be a self-selecting sample of people we've got here, but do you agree? Or you may not be sure. Whatever you think, if you voted a particular way, let us know in the chat. And look, a lot of people right now are voting, I agree, but you may be a person who doesn't agree. And we welcome dissent. We welcome conversation. So please, if you feel that you don't agree with it, drop it in the chat. And quite a few people saying they're not sure, which is an interesting stance to take, Nigel. I've made myself redundant.
Jed is defining existential for me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jed.
Jed, yes. Have you literally, no, Jed, quite seriously for a moment, have you literally made yourself redundant? Do you have no job anymore, or has your job changed substantially as a result of what you do? Would love to know more about that. It's great. Okay, so he says, it's great being freed up to optimize educational outcomes at the university. So not redundant in the sense of no longer having a job, but redundant in the sense that the old role is no longer what's needed. There is a new, more important role, in this case, optimizing educational outcomes, which he's pursuing. Fabulous. So there's our result. We've got two people who don't agree, and we've got 60, roughly 2/3, 1/3 split between the people who agree and those who aren't sure, Nigel. A lot of chat coming through about it. And here's Daisy says this thing, which I hear a lot of, and I've heard it. I've been on a tour for the last 6 weeks talking to people in different parts of the world. Finished up yesterday in a large airline. That's as much as I can say. Throughout the journey, I've heard this. There will always be a need for high quality training, the transactional end of the spectrum. So not existential, but definitely the way we can add most value. So that's a subtle change, Nigel, to what you're saying. So Daisy's saying it's not black and white. We're not in or out, but we have to shift what we're doing. Is that fair enough?
Yes, it is absolutely fair enough. There's some bedrock stuff, but I think you've got to spend less time on the bedrock stuff and more time on the more radical shifts. One big company yesterday was saying to me that they are going to focus on the 20% of staff and the key programs that will make those changes, and the rest they'll encourage people to work on their own, but they're completely refocusing and concentrating on where they can add most value and help in that transition, and everything else is going to take a back seat for a while. So yes, I accept there's got to be you can't say, oh, we'll drop health and safety because we've got to look at existential issues. I think there's some bedrock stuff, but it's where you put the emphasis. And the danger is when you say, oh, we haven't got time to do that new stuff. We've got all our time is taken with all this old stuff. That's where you're wrong. I think you've got to focus.
Nigel, I find it very interesting because we both spent quite a lot of time this year talking to people about this, people at all levels in organisations, and we've come to the same conclusion, which is this. But I want to give a shout out to Fiona. Fiona, I'm going to paraphrase what she says, stop being so melodramatic, Nigel. Now, she doesn't say that. She doesn't say that, but I'm putting those words in her mouth. Look,
you've said that as well, Don, once or twice.
I have actually. Yeah. We don't, we do need to change, but existential change seems a bit dramatic. She's saying, shout out to Alan, a long way from writing acetate sheets on the overhead projector. That's certainly where I came from back in the 1980s, Alan. And yes, we don't do that anymore, do we? So, of course, our skills have to keep developing. I love that. Existential's too dramatic, says Martin. I think we do need to keep evolving. Esther says, hello from Budapest, Hungary with Superflow. Hello, Esther. Good to have you with us. I hope it's warmer there than it is here. So, look.
I doubt it.
Megan says, we've been threatened with AI for decades. We all still have jobs. That's a really good point. Now, AI is definitely ramping up, but we do still all have jobs. Interesting, good point. Alistair's point, L&D is already there. What's needed is true support. Senior leaderships must encourage and empower people to use the learning and actually change how they work. So it's not just us, Nigel. How about that? It's a good point from Alistair, don't you think?
Yes, I do. I completely agree with him.
You've got a lot of stuff to get through, so I'm going to stop interrupting. Anything else you want to say, or shall we move on?
Let's move on.
Okay.
And what I want to do is show you a picture of some salt and pepper pots. And this is highly significant and highly relevant. I want to take you back to the 1950s and a cafe in the Barking Road, which for those who don't realise is part of the salubrious East End of London. And in the upper floor on the Barking Road cafe, Malcolm Allison, a young football player of 22, after training, would sit in that cafe with a group of players, mostly the young, mostly the kind of energetic players, including a very, very young Bobby Moore, and who was only about 17 or 16 at the time. And they would scheme and plan and look at tactics, and they'd use the salt and pepper pot and the salt shaker and the tomato ketchup and the HP sauce, and they would move them around this table, which they'd push together, and they'd plan tactics. What went right at the last game? What went wrong? What could we do differently? If you did that, what would that mean for me as the pepper pot? Essentially, the point I want to make is that essentially, without anyone ever knowing it, this was a community of practice. And interestingly, Malcolm Allison was leading it, and Malcolm Allison was not the captain. Neither was he the manager. Ted Fenton was the manager, but Ted gave them their blessing. And there are two quotes about Malcolm Allison I just want to read you out. First one, as a master tactician and innovator off the field, Allison's contribution on the field is often overlooked. And the second quote is, he should be revered. They should have a statue to him at West Ham. He laid the foundations for the success of the club, not by what he did on the field, but by the knowledge he gave to other people.
Wow, by the knowledge he gave to other people.
A very interesting quote, I think.
For a footballer, yeah.
For a footballer, but the point, I think this kind of changed English football. It became more thoughtful, more about tactics, more about thinking strategy, and less about getting out there and booting the ball around. And it was transformational for West Ham at this time in the 50s. I know some of you will find this astonishing news. They were only in the second division and desperate to get back to the first division, which they did in 1959. So Allison rebuilt the team. This is where the academy started and where they went scouting for young players from the local schools and built this kind of new generation of exciting players based around a community of practice. Let's share our knowledge. And I think we could go back to the 50s. We could learn from Malcolm Allison and those other players sitting up there in the Barking Road with their cups of tea. But I think it's important, and it shows that transformation can occur from people sitting in a room together. If you'd have had them all separated out, never, or a manager saying, "Don't you dare do that! You haven't listened to me. I'm the manager. I'm in charge of this." These things would never have happened. And
Nigel, would it
I
have
think
happened?
that's a
Would it
lesson.
would it have
Go on,
happened if the
sorry.
manager had? Would it have happened if the manager had come in and said, "Right, now we're going to do a conversation around what happened in the match"?
It's possible,
Yeah,
but the point that Allison was making, what he wanted to do was develop the younger players. So his focus was on let's all, and it was non-threatening. And it's not the manager saying, "What are we going to do?" And then there's some consequences. This was people just being a community of practice, and I don't think that stops a manager being definitive. In an organization, you don't get rid of all the leaders because we've got a couple of communities of practice, but I think they can enhance the leadership. And that's where there's often a gap in organizations. They allow them to kind of run on the margin. But Ted Fenton assumed that group would take place, and he listened to the outcomes,
right.
and he changed his own practice as a result of that. And all credit to him. And he never got any glory. It was the managers who came afterwards, John Lyall and Greenwood, who actually got all the glory.
Maybe more detail about the history of West Ham than we possibly need today, but
Surely not. I find that astonishing, but I think we should move on.
the points are landing. Megan says increased and encouraged autonomy. I like that. Yeah. Giving
Yes,
people the chance to
exactly.
build the community of practice. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly right. It's respect. And I think
Yes.
if we look at what was going on there, I think autonomy is absolutely spot on. I think trust was spot on. I think empowerment was spot on. I think engagement was spot on. And my lesson from all of that, which came out of the research I did for the last book, was that you should spend more time focusing on the conditions of learning and less time on building the learning itself. Because if you get the conditions right, the learning can take care of itself to a certain extent. And certainly, if you've got engaged people who want to learn, you cut the time to mastery down, and you're pushing against an open door. You're not trying to put your toe in the jam and trying to force it open because no one cares and no one's interested.
And the
So,
inverse. Sorry, Nigel.
go on, you tell me what the
I
inverse
was
is.
going to say the inverse also applies. If you don't have the conditions for learning, it doesn't matter what else you do, nothing's going to happen. So
Nothing will
it's an
happen.
absolute essential.
Well, it just becomes a kind of punishment regime.
Yeah.
And, I said to people, when I joined the BBC, which was a long time ago, but when I joined the BBC, learning was a punishment. If you met someone and they quietly, calmly admitted they had a coach, what that meant was they were failing absolutely in their job. And as a last desperate stand before being fired, they were given a coach. So being involved in the learning process was actually a negative. Once you were trained, once you were an engineer, you were an engineer. Once you were a camera person, you were a camera person. There was nothing beyond that, or very little beyond that. And that whole culture had to be completely turned on its head. And one of the things that we tried to do was focus on the conditions to create an environment where learning was more acceptable and more loved, essentially, in the organization. And we had some success in that, but not 100%. Right, shall we move on?
Yes. Alan is saying it reflects there is still the need for the human touch. We have more data
Yes.
analysis and tech than ever before,
Completely.
but the conversation is still the best way to change and evolve. Alan has dropped a mention of VAR, video assistant refereeing, in there, but we're not going to go down the football route. But Alan,
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan. But Alan, if your team wins 6-0 in the Champions League, then you're not really concerned about a few things one way or the other, right?
Or a few salt and pepper pots.
Exactly. What's this frog doing?
This is generated by AI, and I was trying to make the point that organizations are more like frogs than bicycles, and this is what it generated. It's a kind of frog emerging out of the bicycle. So if you look at the shaft of the back wheel, that becomes a frog's leg, and there are no pedals. Anyway, I don't really care about whether it's an elegant graphic, but the point is that even if you put a frog's head on the front of a bike, it's still a bike. And if you see organizations as mechanical bits that can be taken apart and put back together again, I think you're missing a trick. And a lot of OD, which focuses on processes and models and doesn't focus on people, so I'm back 100% with Alan. Then it's not an error, but it's just going to be far harder and more difficult. Whereas if you go with people, so this lovely picture here, that is not what OD is. OD isn't about coupling and uncoupling and rewiring the bits. OD is a human experience. And if you have people with you, they will change. If they're against you, you're going to struggle forever. And that is an interesting picture. That is showing a woman assembling one of the early IBM computers. And the entire computer industry in the early days was run by women. They were the programmers, they were the managers, they ran the systems, and they even built the computers. And then at some point, there's a really good book called The Computer Boys Took Over or Take Over. They realized this was quite a sexy industry, and in came the men and out went the women. And it's taken a long time to get back to some balance. But that's an illustration. There's a woman building an IBM mainframe computer, and that was not uncommon. But that's not what OD is. It's something very, very different and much more human. And I'm going to keep emphasizing that human side by getting on to the next thing. This is someone I really admire, Adam Kampf. He's a neuroscientist, and he's taking his children to London Zoo, and he's looking at these monkeys jumping from tree to tree, branch to branch, and thinking, how the hell do they do that? Because every branch is different. A branch gives or doesn't give. But the monkeys step seamlessly onto a bendy branch, to a firm branch, to a bendy branch, to grabbing another branch, swinging themselves across, just like it was a solid pathway and if we tried to do that, we'd be flat on our backs within seconds. And his conclusion was that mammals, in this case monkeys, create in some ways a simulation of reality in their head. Their brain does that, and therefore their work with the simulation, it means it's kind of almost unconscious. The simulation helps them go forward. And in the same way as if you're driving somewhere and you arrive somewhere and you go, how did I get here? Your brain, that you have a simulation in your head, and it's kind of unconscious almost. You just do it. And if we had to drive cognitively, it would be a nightmare, because we'd have to think about which gear. We just do it, and because we have a simulation of driving. But his perception, the big insight that he got, was that unlike any other mammal, a human being has a group shared simulation of the world. So he calls that a super intelligence, and language was the key to that. We learn from talking, listening, reading. We learn from watching. We have motor neurons that actually copy other neurons to increase the rapidity of the learning. So we are a massively important super learning simulation. We operate in community, and yet in many organizations, we learn in isolation. We learn sitting in front of that computer, going through that screen, working it out on your own. And we're missing a trick. We're missing a kind of fundamental skill of human beings to learn from each other. And if you take, that little bit of your brain is where you learn all those simulations. Your simulation is held in that premotor cortex. Let's not worry about that. But if we go on to Vygotsky, Vygotsky in 1976 published a book saying that the most effective learning is when humans of kind of close proximity in ability learn together, and they scaffold and help each other. And he called that the zone of proximal development, which is immediately alienated 90% of the population at the stroke of a pen, because he didn't have or typewriter. But what Vygotsky is saying is that if you are doing something which is far from where you are now, it's really scary. If you're just doing something which is really easy, you're bored to tears. There's this zone, intense learning zone. But to be most effective, we need other people. And do we listen to that? Has the Vygotsky message come through? I'm not convinced that we couldn't all just spend a little bit of time with Vygotsky and spend some of our time joining up the islands in the organization. If we can connect the organization, I think we will do a huge amount to accelerate the learning process and build a more resilient organization, because the knowledge is shared rapidly. We still operate in departmental islands, team islands, often in organization. I'm not going to tell that lot. And we isolate, and we almost build barriers to stop those connections occurring. And yet, my belief in this crazy idea of an organizational brain, if you imagine an organization like neurons in the brain, that we don't have 100 billion staff in your organization, but you have sometimes thousands, sometimes hundreds, sometimes tens. But what makes the organization smart is the connections between those individuals. And the more just as if you had no connections in your brain, you would be absolutely useless. You'd be dumb. You grow from babyhood. Your brain is just firing those synapses, making those connections. And we need to keep that going for the whole of our life. It doesn't stop when we're 16, 18, 21, or when we get married or whatever. We need the connections right the way through life. And the more connections in our brain, the smarter we are, the more we can join up and make sense of the world. And I think exactly the same. The metaphor is that if an organization connects people and builds more and more connections and doesn't set up infrastructure that stops people connecting, we would make organizations smarter, the knowledge would be shared, and we'd move forward faster. So that is my theory, and I'm going to explore that. Yeah, go on, Don.
You've stimulated a lot of thinking here. I'm not going to ask you to break what you're doing, but I just want to say, I just want to say to people who are putting questions in, please keep them coming. We're going to deal with those at the right point, and I think some of these do need a lot of discussion. I'm going to save them to the end. In particular, we've got Janet, possibly Janet, I don't know, and Debbie saying, how do we get people, particularly in white collar roles, if I'm guessing, to share their knowledge? Let's not deal with that now because it's a big topic, but it is crucial. So let's look at that
fundamental.
At the end. And I also think, Nigel, coming back to your point about the future role of L&D, I think that's our job in the future, not creating content, but enabling people to share. Huge question. Thank you for raising it. Nigel, back to you.
Yeah, well, the quick answer to that question about how do you get those communities of practice going is not to get people to share knowledge. Ironically, I think if you say to people, now you have to share what you know, that is a boring and a tedious and a kind of not very nice opportunity. What do you do? How do you share? What you do is you get people to focus on problems. If you get people together to problem solve, the knowledge gets shared in the process of solving problems. So I think the key is to set challenges, to focus on real issues. I can't imagine any organization that can't come up bang with 20 different issues, but the executive team's role, if you push those out through the organization, you'll get communities of practice developing almost organically and naturally. But let's move on. The point that Gary Ridge makes in the WD-40 company is not learning and teaching are very, very important. It's his biggest lozenge, if you like, and he's right at the top. But what he would say if he was here is that all of the learning and teaching is nothing unless it's connected. So it's fundamentally connected to the values in his organization of building communities that can work on issues and challenges. It's about preparing the organization for the future, getting the right people ready in the present and accommodating for that future, thinking about that future. It's about empowering people. He calls them warriors. We're out there, we've got a world to win. But you've got to make people feel that they're working together as almost like an army to conquer the world in a sense, and above all to celebrate success. And he sees that's the role of learning and teaching. Do a lot of the L&D people do a lot of the celebration, because that's in some ways every achievement of the organization in his eyes is the celebration of learning achieved, learning materialized, learning in 3D, if you like. So that's the point I want to make as well. It's connecting the organization, but not having learning somewhere on planet Zog, looking down benevolently or looking up jealously. It's got to be right in the heart and plugged in and connected. That's really, really important. So, Don, we're going to move to a
A
discussion.
question. You've been talking about connecting the organisation, and actually, we've got. Don't worry, those questions haven't disappeared. They are existing there. I've emptied up that big box in the middle, put a new box in, so that we can start chatting around this question: how do we connect the organisation? Now, actually, Nigel, a lot of the questions to you were, how do we do this? We know it's important.
Yes.
How do we get people to share?
Yeah.
What I'd love to do, and I know what you're looking for, is to have people say, well, what are you currently doing right now in your organisation to get people to connect, to get them to share, and so on. And I have some resources as well, which I'll share at the end. It's Nigel's
Yeah.
webinar, but this is very much in my thinking at the moment as well. So we're going to share some the resources at the end about how you can make this happen.
Yes.
And any thoughts you've got, please drop them into that chat. I'm going to have a sip of water.
Please. I cannot believe that this really lovely community is which full of ideas already. This community can't help solve this problem. So if you're doing something that has worked on connecting the organization, then please add it in the chat. Yeah.
Some nice stuff coming
Mentors
through.
for new starts.
Yeah, that's a nice one, isn't it?
Yeah, and particularly if it's reverse mentoring as well, that those
mhm.
mentors are learning from the new starts and their perception and pushing that back into the organization. So the new starts are learning about the place and what they can do to succeed and fit in, and also the organization is learning from people coming in with fresh eyes, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed.
That's one of the great things about
Don, when you join a
new
work.
starters. New starters offer a unique opportunity with their new perspective, and you don't get that after they've been there for a month. It's gone.
Yep.
So it's a great thing to tap into.
Dead to the world. Yeah.
Janice
Jed
says,
makes it. Oh, sorry. I was just
"No,
going to
you
say.
go on. Go on."
Well, just that what Jed is saying is really important. You often have to reconfigure the space. That you can create a space that is more learner centered, that encourages communication and discussion, or you can put people in cubicles and have walls between them, and none of that happens. And you know that when Zoom was trying to get its staff back to the office, which is ironic really for Zoom, but Zoom had a big campaign to get its staff back. What they did was they completely reconfigured the offices and said, look at this exciting space where you can brainstorm, you can work together, you can find out stuff. They came back because they wanted to do stuff, not because they were ordered to attend and sit in the desk and do what they could do at home. Sorry, Don, you go ahead.
I'm just going through. I'm going to quickly do a run through. And look, as always, the answer is in the room, right? We always have great people coming together, sharing their thoughts. Jana saying, we're setting up academies around themes like change management and so on. It's early days, but it will help to link people up and get information about L&D in one place, and also, of course, share from each other. I love Megan's thing here. Debate club at the Open University. We've created open circles. Colleagues get together, discuss topics relevant to everybody. They've become so popular in an academic environment. People love a critical discussion with colleagues across the organisation they don't normally get to meet. That's very interesting, Nigel. This idea of building bridges with people outside your normal part in the organisation. And create a strong purpose. Sorry, go on, Nigel.
Don, doing what we're doing today, what we're doing is learning a huge amount of gaining respect and learning a huge amount of stuff from people that I don't know many of the people on that screen, but I deeply respect the points they're making, and they're incredibly useful. Together, we could really work on it. And if you can imagine that same sort of discussion inside an organization, within an hour, you'd come up with enough to keep you going for a month of activity and experimentation. And that sort of shared, John Drysdale, John, you're right. If you're all working on the same thing, if you're all trying to focus and make the organization better or solve a problem, there's more energy and more success than just having big thoughts. I'm not a great believer in, let's share, think about this. It's have a purpose, have a question, have a debate, work on a problem. They're the things that get everyone moving and motivated.
Fiona's made the point in the general chat that this business of how you communicate when you come together is a core reason for doing the leadership training face to face, because you get those bridges being built. Sorry, there's something happening just outside the room. I need to go check on. Nigel, I'll be back in 1 minute.
I'll move on. Yes. Okay. Thank you. So we can keep those up because I have no power to change them, and just go to the next idea. And this is a sort of crazy idea, but I think it's more and more. I think it's true. And people get it
All
when
good.
if you can imagine in that open university, in that open discussion forum, when you come out of it, what you find is that the insights are not locked in anyone's head. The insights are actually in the room. The insights are between people, not inside people's heads. And if you can have an organization where most of the knowledge is somewhere outside individuals, people you can talk to, groups, maybe in somewhere stored online, you've got a smarter organization. And in some ways, if you simply have really smart people and they go, the knowledge disappears. If you have a really smart organization, it can lose people. There's always going to be normal attrition, but the knowledge stays because they've spent their time empowering other people and learning from other people. And I think the best and most resilient organizations will be the ones who ensure, not just hope, but ensure that learning lies somewhere in the space between people all around the organization. So it's, and if you go to an organization that is trying really hard to create that knowledge, there's a sort of electricity, there's a buzz in the place that you want to be there, and you want to stay working there because you're drawing power from that sense of community and that knowledge that is, and the fact you can ask anyone anything, no one's going to stop you, that you can share problems, you can admit failure, all of those things create that organization where the knowledge is somewhere in the room rather than locked away in an individual.
Okay, so there's lots here, but also there's other stuff we've got to cover. So shall we move on, Nigel? Even though this is
Yes,
a very rich conversation,
we should move on.
let's do that.
Does it make sense? So any comments on that?
Well, I think we've just answered it. It does make sense. Everyone's been putting in these great questions
let's move
and
on
points.
then.
Yeah.
If that makes sense, we move on. This is from CIPD report on what's changing in L&D, and it's got 52% of leads. But this is the thing that really shocked me, and I've done a very, very elegant way of accentuating that. I hope you're impressed. It took me ages to get that curve perfect, and essentially, I was deeply shocked by 13% of people in L&D are exploring and experimenting, testing and learning, taking on new ideas. And I just think in the world that we're talking about, the future, we cannot have 13% thinking that they can explore and experiment, or don't have exploration and experiment as a core part of what they do. It's pretty, that figure just shocked me really, because I think in some ways, if what comes out of this webinar is that people say, I'm going to get out there and try a few things, see what works, see what doesn't, because a lot of things aren't going to work. All these ideas that were put up on the screen, all these things, Martin's idea of 11s, weekly get together of people. I'm going to try 11s. That's an exploration and experiment.
Can we just explain what 11s are for the large number of people who are not from the UK here?
Yeah, 11s is a weekly get-together of people around the building sharing interesting things they were doing. And 11s is a kind of coffee break time. That's what 11s is. I don't know where it came from.
11 o'clock.
I have no idea. 11s is. Do you know?
It's 11 o'clock.
Do. Yeah, just because it's 11 o'clock, isn't it?
That's right.
And that was coffee break time.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Should we move on? Right. So how are you experimenting? I'd just like to know, give us some insight again into the way that you are experimenting and exploring, because I just think it's so important that more of that happens. And if someone's idea on the screen, I'm here today for Lure, that's your experimentation and your exploration. I hope that's true. I hope people came in thinking, well, am I going to waste an hour of my time with that idiot? Oh, maybe I will. At least Don will be there. And they've come in and thought, I've got some ideas, and I can take those forward. That's exploration. So we should plunge ourselves into places that we're not sure about that may or may not deliver for us. We read things that may or may not be useful, but definitely try to push the envelope a little bit. Cross-training sessions with other teams, absolutely. Where do we see what do we see the world? How do we share? What overlaps? What are different perspectives? Using AI tools to embed in digital learning, practicing people leader conversations. Yes, I saw Ben Betts was showing Learning Pool's AI chatbot, which is designed for difficult conversations, and he had one live. So there was this difficult member of staff who you had to persuade that he should come in for 2 days a week, and it was fantastic.
Wow.
Because every point you made, he'd have a brilliant counterpoint why there was no reason why he should make an effort to come into the office ever again. So working with that chatbot, you would have a much better conversation with a real human being, guaranteed. But that's just one. There's all sorts of areas where you can learn by having conversations with. In some ways, it's like having a conversation with yourself. Marike started a process of bottom-up input and planning. Yes. Exactly. Just listen to what's going on at the sharp end. The O2 started listening to their call center staff and saying, what's happening out there? The call center staff showed them before the executives had a clue what was working and what wasn't working, what promotions were a disaster, what were incredibly successful, what products weren't working, what integrations weren't working, what areas were bad for reception. They could map that all just by listening to the people at the bottom of the organization who had hitherto been completely ignored. So you can get a lot out of that. And it's you're out there doing some field work, you're exploring, and exploration is really helpful. There's lots of great ideas here.
I think it's a really good point here from Daisy saying, look, we need to reframe what we think delivery is. For me, delivery means what I used to do in the 1980s and 1990s, which was delivering a course. We kind of recoil from it. Don't put me in the training box. But Daisy's saying that delivery can also be about facilitating conversations and using our skills to enable engagement, questioning, coaching, and so on. So I think delivery does mean different things to different people. And just because to me it means training delivery doesn't mean it means that to everybody else. And in particular doesn't mean it means it to the rest of the organization. So I think that's a good point, Daisy. Any thoughts on that, Nigel?
Yeah. Don, your voice is a bit kind of fishbowly. Like
All right. I probably need to sort my microphone out. You carry on with yourself for a second, and I'll do what I can.
Voice,
You sound beautiful as always. Beautiful as always.
Right.
Oh, hang on. People are saying that we are equally good. So it may just be you,
okay,
Nigel. Okay,
right.
Thanks for that feedback, everyone.
There's lots of good stuff here, so you can capture this, you can screenshot it, or you can go to the recording. None of this will be lost, by the way.
Yeah, it all stays forever.
Because I think I'm going to go back through these and I'm going to look very carefully at each one, because I think there's some extraordinary knowledge that I need to understand as well. So thank you for all of your effort. Now I've just got a couple of quotes, and they come from the reverse of each other, but they say the same thing. Peter Gustafsson, who's in Sweden, and he's saying, if you really want to change an organization, you can't just expect to change people and the organization stays the same. It's just not going to work. If you're going to make big changes, you have to change the organization as well as the people. And I wholeheartedly agree with this. So in many ways, the consequence of everything we're saying is not just about reinvigorated, re-energized people solving problems faster. We need to change the organization to be able to accommodate that. But then there's Claire, and what Claire said was, in her book, which came out this year, she said, it's not just good enough to scale your business. You have to scale your people. And so she's saying exactly the opposite of Gustafsson, but they're agreeing with each other. It's about the organization and it's about the people, and the two go together. And again, I think not enough L&D thinks about how the organization needs to change to accommodate the kinds of things that they want to see happening. And that's where the partnerships occur. You need to talk to people and say, well, what can we do to the organization to make it work better in the future? And in an AI-driven organization, which many will be, if you think that the existing hierarchies and the existing processes, oh, they can just stay the same, or we just encourage it, it's not going to happen. Just as a lot of what I'm saying in an AI-driven organization where the learning is accelerated by individuals, the key is to get that out of individuals and help change the organization. And that's where you'll get the power of AI, not just in someone saying, oh, that only took me 10 minutes and I thought it'd take me a whole day. That's not it. It's when you roll that up and it ends up with the whole organization itself. So those are two very wise points. And I think this is wise too. That is the only way you're going to understand what needs to be done in organizations. Not doing what people tell you. Get out there and have a look. Field work is the essence. And in some ways, for me, this is field work. I'm learning from so many people making such good contributions on the screen. That for me, that's a part of my field work. But I never go into a company without doing field. I won't go in and say, oh, we need a bit of this. I'll say, well, can I talk to 4 people so I can get an idea of where they're coming from? And very often this is modified in because I'm listening to what people are saying, and what they're saying is slightly different. So please do your field work and take on field work. I've had a lot of questions about, well, how do I do field work?
Nigel, how do you make the time to do it? That's the question, because nobody on this call has got an empty diary. How do you make the time to spend a couple of hours to go somewhere and check something out?
Yeah, it's true. I think you have to make time. One of the people I talked to yesterday, who was at a large company, said the one thing I've taken from what you're saying is I'm not making enough time to think and reflect. I'm not making enough time to make my work more efficient. I blank out. My entire calendar is blacked out every week, and I just don't have a second to reflect on what I've done. And I realize I'm losing insight. I'm being less efficient. That's the truth. You've got to make that time. Once you start making it, you will continue to make it, because you'll get so much that will shortcut what you're trying to do. So you've got to break into the circle somewhere.
Megan,
I always say diarize. Put in 9 until 11 field work.
Yeah.
Put it in. Don't just leave. Hope. I'll see. I've got a minute at Chris. Go for a walk with people. Say, can we just go for a walk? And let me talk to you about this or that.
Megan and Lior say the same thing. Absolutely, yeah.
Let's looking at the time. Just let me talk about this.
Didn't you want to go into a poll after the fieldwork one, Nigel?
We need to engage and recognize that much of what's going on in organizations is uncertain at the moment. And therefore, to create a learning operation which focuses on simplifying and making certainty, giving people certainty, is an injustice. I think you're not helping people by telling them it's quite simple, just learn these 3 things, everything will be fine. We need to reframe around uncertainty. That's what Etienne Wenger, that's a quote from Etienne Wenger. If we can mutually engage around uncertainty and make our best guess at what needs to happen, that inevitably helps the whole organization and helps people feel they're not on their own, and not knowing and not having the answers is okay in this environment. And rushing too quickly to certainty is almost inevitably a mistake. So when we looked at this, was from Egler, and she did a wonderful webinar for Don at the last Learning Technologies Forum on the impact of AI. And she put it like this: it's about content and skill development, learning strategy, and eventually business strategy. And I just quite literally turned it upside down. Not quite as elegant as it might have been, but I am saying that don't worry about content. Who cares if you say, oh, I can develop content in 10 minutes quicker or 2 weeks quicker? No one cares. What they care about is there is this thunderbolt coming at us. What are we going to do? How is that going to impact the business? How do we change the business? And I think L&D has got this massive, massive role in accommodating all of this, in helping people change and helping people manage and to use effectively that AI, and therefore change their roles, learn new skills. And Don, you've got something to share with everyone.
I do.
Building
Thank
on
you.
that.
Thank you. Nigel, could you hear me okay? Can you hear me, Nigel? No, obviously not. I'm just going to talk very quickly about this, and then I'll jump in. So I'm releasing a report today. Actually, it's on Egla's first off on her LinkedIn, but it's also on my website. I'm going to drop it in here. It's just a quick review of how AI is being used in learning and development at the moment. What it shows is what Nigel's saying, which is that most people are using AI in order to, guess what, just do the current job a bit better. They're using it to create more content faster, and they're using it for efficiencies of operation. Not much being used. I know there are people on this call who are doing this, but not much is being used around skills or around personalization. The other two areas where we'd expect AI to be used, much less. Most of it is in those areas. But that report is out there now. It's free to download. Just go to the website and download it. You don't even have to give your email for it. We just want to get it out there. It talks about how people are using AI now, what the benefits are, what the barriers are, and also Egla's done a really good section on what you can do to get started if you're not sure about it. Nigel, back to you.
Don, I actually can't make out what you're saying now because it's so kind of distorted, and I have no idea why that is. Am I the only one on the call? So
Everyone else says they can hear me.
Sure is that everything you've said has been unbelievably wise and important, and everyone else is benefiting. Sound is good for me now. Don, speak now.
Hello. No, everyone else is saying that I'm fine. Nigel, you carry on.
Bizarre. Anyway, but I'm going to move on because we need to. You've got the link in the. Please copy that link in the chat and have a look at that report. It's literally it hit the world about half an hour ago. You are the first to have that, and it kind of builds on everything that I've been saying. But the next, I've almost finished. You'll be glad to hear. But this, I don't want to go away without just saying, please see yourself as a practitioner. And what I mean by a practitioner is that you are a professional and that your career is designed to improve and develop your practice. Just as if you go and see a physio, your physio is constantly looking for new ways of creating pain in your leg or your arm or your muscle or all the other places where you ache in order to make you better. But they are meeting their colleagues. They listen carefully. They read stuff. They don't stay successful unless they develop their practice. But in some ways, I've met a lot of L&D people who kind of outsource that to suppliers and expect them to come up with the answers on their behalf because they're paying for them. And I think you'll have a much better conversation with a supplier if you know what you're talking about and that you're on top of the issues. And the best way to do that, I've just said the third point, consciously improve your practice. How do you do that? Stay in touch with peers. To me, this has been a really interesting engagement with my peers. And I consciously listen and learn from what they have to say. Sometimes you can find 4 people and you can meet once a month. Sometimes you just have to drop into different fora and connect. But you should be on top of all of the stuff that's going on, and particularly with AI. Do not fall behind. Have a view, understand the issues, and therefore change the way you do things and share that with your peers outside and inside the organization. Consciously improve your practice, because if you don't do that, you lose credibility. And this is a disastrous time to lose credibility. This is when you need to increase credibility because you need to take on that bigger role. Alan Brown, he said he really liked you aside from being a hammer. That's probably a lot more reasons why Don could really not like me. The hammer is just a very small example of a different view of the world. That's so true. So let's finish by just saying that these points up there. If we can get learning is an energy. It spins around the organization. It creates community and connection and power. And if you have the gyroscope, when a gyroscope's spinning, it corrects itself. You turn it on its side, it stays there. If you have not got that gyroscope spinning, it just falls on the floor and breaks. So you need the energy of learning to keep your eye on the horizon and be able to change and be resilient. And the community should be your default structure, not individuals. And I'm saying make sure that people have got as much local autonomy as it's possible to give them, and they will thrive in that kind of environment. And build a climate where knowledge is shared, not hoarded. And make sure that if you want to ask people for help, there's a climate where you can do that without being fired or despised. And so many organizations, people are scared to ask for help. It's a mission of weakness. And it linked right next to that is that blame culture. I'm not going to get blamed. I'll deflect it. I'll CC Don and then claim, I told you that, Don. You should know that. And it's really appalling the way people never ever do anything wrong. It's always other people around them that do things wrong. And if we don't ever do anything wrong, we can never learn from our mistakes. So if you can learn from mistakes, get huge support from other people, ask for help, work in those various communities which are linked in the ways that some of you have suggested on the screen. You get that learning spinning around the organization. And if you want to learn more, I've got 3 more webinars coming up in the new year. You can go to the website, and this is all linking up to the launch of my book in May, which is about organizational learning, where I'm trying to go in much more depth in all of these areas. But I just think I'm starting a debate. I really haven't got all the answers. And there's a little statement at the beginning of the book. I quoted someone saying, I only write books because I don't know the answer. I don't write books because I know all the answers. And books are an exploration for me. And these webinars are an exploration for me. So this stuff is really, really important. Questions? Let's have a go at the questions, Don. Are you still? Can I still hear you?
Can you just check your microphone? Hold on, I'm going to write, Nigel.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Don is going to type. So I'll just pick up a few of the questions. What is the existential change? The existential change is that you're not a learning operation. You are an operation that is helping the organization change. Your entire focus switches to the needs of the organization and helping the strategy and the implementation of change. That's your main job. It's not to deliver courses and programs of work. That to me, Jed, I consider that to be an existential change. You might not, and I wouldn't argue with you if you say, well, we're there already. What is it on the bottom up mentoring? I think mentoring, listening to anyone is really important. And for a CEO to never listen to anyone in the organization, I would criticize her hugely, because you've got this chance when new people come in. You've got a chance when people are promoted. These inflection points in an organization and in a career, these are the times when people are super, super tuned in. And they're the times that you've got to listen. And you've got no mechanism for listening, no mechanism for understanding. Only your immediate peers are the ones who inform you. Then you're going to miss massive amounts that's going on. There's no issue that can't be anticipated, really. Just the faint hints of it can be picked up in the organization if you put your feelers out, and the people who work outside the organization. I remember John Chambers of Cisco saying to me, I've never had a surprise. There's never been a big economic shift that has surprised me, because I listen. I knew they were coming, including, economic downturns. I can see them. I can feel them. My customers are telling me about them. Sorry, Don.
Nigel, it's all right. I just want to make a point to everyone. They've got a huge number of resources on the left-hand side there, so please do look at them. I mentioned earlier the fact that there were some resources around helping people build communities and get good practice in helping people in the organization share. That's at the bottom of that list on the left-hand side. You should scroll down to it. It's work done by Harold Jarke and Anka Iordarke at Citi, and it's 2 different case studies. Super interesting. Looking at us not in the classic training delivery, but much more in the helping people learn from each other approach. So please do look at those. Nigel, we've got 1 minute to
I can
go.
hear you now.
You can hear me.
I can
Okay.
hear you.
Hurrah. All
Hallelujah.
right. Right. My big clock tells me we've got 1 minute left. So, Nigel, you have 1 minute. How are you going to change everybody's views and galvanize people in the final minute?
I can only say to people, just listen and learn from the insights, on the screen. And if there's nothing there that challenges you or excites you or makes you want to get up tomorrow morning and do something different, then that worries me a lot. There are things that I think we should be doing that really, really happen in reality in organizations. And what you got to do is take some of these insights from here, from this screen, and put them onto a different table. And I apologize, Don. It was my earphones that were causing trouble. Another Apple product that has let me down, Don.
I wasn't going to say anything about that in our perpetual Apple versus Microsoft duel, which has lasted at least 2 decades. Please do connect with Nigel. His contact details are over on the left-hand side of your screen, and it's very much worth keeping in touch with Nigel, following him, see what's going on. I'd look at all those resources. In fact, just copy the whole box and go through them at your leisure. But finally, I just want to say thank you to everybody in the room for sharing your ideas and experiences. Always. And this must be like the 500th one of these we've done recently. It's approaching 1,000 of these I've done.
Wow.
It is still the case that the knowledge in the room is always valuable and worth listening to. To echo Nigel's point, you just got to listen to what's going on. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nigel, for what you've been doing. And one last point. If people contact you, they will be able to pick up more of this on webinars that you're running next year. That's right, yeah?
Yes, exactly. Fantastic. And there's a link at the bottom of the screen, Reboot Learning. It's all happening, I hope. And they're going to be better as a result of everything you've told me today. Thank you so much.
It's all iterative. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy your lunch if you're in the UK.
I really appreciate it.
In the US. All right. Yes. Bye for now.
Take care. Thank you. And thank you, Don.